Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I hope you are still doing well in this still continually bizarre world that we find ourselves in. Hope you're staying inside. Hope you are flattening the curve in the best way you can. And if you do have to be outside and you still have to be working, we appreciate what you do and hope that you're staying safe. Today in New York City, we've had three thunderstorms this morning, followed immediately by sunshine, and then kind of like thunderstorm, sun, thunderstorm, sun, which is unintentionally a metaphor for not only how I'm coping with we are now in we're about a month and maybe a week into quarantine here, and I am a couple of days away from my 34th birthday, which will be spent in quarantine, but I am not feeling sad about it. But kind of that contrast of what I talk about a lot here on the show, this kind of like drastic contrast between things being really great and really horrible, like, sunshine, awesome, disaster, clouds, is interestingly a theme of our episode today, because my guest on the show is comedian Tristan Miller. Tristan reached out to me. We have not met personally, but he listens and is a supporter of the show, and he reached out to me about wanting to appear, and I more or less was like open to the opportunity, and we ended up having a really thoughtful and I'm going to say very like emotional kind of conversation that deals. We talk a lot about mental health. We talk about the craft of stand-up comedy, origin stories. He's from the Midwest and then moved to New York City. I'm from a part of Maryland that is considered very rural and southern, so I related to that a lot. And we ended up having a really lovely conversation. So I am looking forward to sharing this with you guys. And if you listen to this show, I would love to hear from you. Maybe we can read some messages on the show here. You can find me on Twitter at Comic Will Carey. You can send me a message there. You can also send a message to me on Instagram. I'm Will Carey 23, and it's just a bizarre place that we still find ourselves in, and not unlike Jeff Goldblum's character in The Fly. Like, there are days when I feel scared. There are days when I feel pretty at peace and I'm making the best of the situation. And then there are days where I am morbidly curious about how bad or what else can happen. Because every day I am continuously surprised by the new realities and situations that the world continues to throw at us. So I'm really continuously baffled. So thank you guys for being here with me. And let's go to my chat with comedian Tristan Miller.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, man?
Doing okay.
Glad to hear it. How's your correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if we've ever really met, really, have we?
No, we haven't, but we run in like the same sort of circles. So
Yes.
I know of you. I wouldn't say I know you. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. When you messaged me, I did like my cursory analysis. I was like, okay, he does an anime podcast. We could talk for an hour.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you how you've been faring. I'm on, I think, week 3 and 2 days of quarantine. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Had a little bit of a freak out today because there was an issue with my unemployment. But other than that, things have been all right. I'm trying to keep busy and like keep myself focused on like what I can control. But, sometimes it's a little hard.
Exactly, because I think this is a situation where so many of us are feeling very out of control for for a very very good reason. The reason being like what feels like I feel the survival of the human race kind of depends on us, not being as free as we're used to, specifically in the United States. As
Yeah, absolutely.
and and yeah, I feel like crisis when I feel like there's so many situations that ultimately break down to kind of like a crisis of control. I've had a long-standing theory that Starbucks is popular because uh, they will make the drink any way you want, and
Oh, sure.
you're the boss of your own destiny for that moment.
Yeah, precisely. I think there's a lot to that. And then also it's a mixture of, control, but also knowing the elements that that the known quantities there.
Exactly. Like there's
Yeah.
like thinking about. I feel like I realized for me at least, like keeping as much of a routine as possible during this because I
hmm
grew up in like the middle of nowhere, so I'm not totally. The idea of like staying in a room with your thoughts and nothing else is not totally immune to me. But I knew
Yeah.
that if I was gonna like keep it together, I was gonna have to keep whatever of my creative routine I could do. If I can't get on stage, I'm gonna still do a podcast, and I'll go as hard on the podcast as I possibly can.
Yeah. I had the exact same response. And like I unfortunately I had a routine set, and then I did a couple of like gigs that required me to stay up late, and now like it's all higgledy piggledy, and I have to reassert myself.
No, yeah, I understand. I understand that completely. So yes, I when you talk about the circles that we run in, yeah, I think we both kind of have that. We're in that periphery of like the QED, like Queens Creek, sort of venues.
Yeah,
In
yeah. Good.
Oh, and I guess let's. I kind of want to trace this a little bit because this is like the first time where we're really getting to know each other. Where do you come from, Tristan?
Yeah. Oh, I was born in Minnesota, raised in South Dakota, moved to Minnesota. I moved back out here, and then I moved back to Minnesota, and then I moved back out here. So those three places at various times.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I that now
Yeah.
that you say that, that kind of that makes sense when I listen to you because I can kind of hear the accent a little
Oh, for
bit.
sure there.
Oh yeah,
Oh
oh
yeah.
yeah.
If I say Minnesota, it comes out
Uh
so
huh.
much. But I've lived in New York long enough that I'll say door and hot dog, and like it's like little words like that. It's very strange. And the way I've kind of put it as well, temperament wise, is like I'm too nice to be a New Yorker, but I'm too impolite to be a Midwesterner, and I am a man with no country.
I can relate to that because like words for me specifically being from Maryland, I try to I try
Uh-huh.
to make sure I say Maryland and not Merlin, like blended all together,
Oh yeah,
or
Baltimore.
Baltimore, or
Yeah.
like the DC, like again that whole DC area, like Mid Atlantic, like water, that comes
Oh
out on
yeah.
occasion. Uh, but I
Oh,
do. But I do find that I don't think I have too much of a noticeable accent, but do put on more of a southern accent depending on if I'm in the South because I find that it ingratiates me when I'm down
Mhm.
there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I fully understand. And it's one of those things of like I went to acting school, and so they try to neutralize your accent as much as possible, but also
Right.
that neutral like American accent is closer to the Midwest accent than anything else. So it's like, well, I kind of got off easy that way. But yeah, I will after like a week in Minnesota start kind of talking like, oh yeah, for sure, that sort of thing.
Totally. The same
I
way like when I talk to my comedian friends, eventually I get like, oh yeah, I'm real sorry about that. There, totally yes. Oh, I'm real sorry about our president. He's not being really nice there, is he? Um,
Oh yeah.
so what was what was Minnesota like? I have an idea that Minnesota, not a lot of people seem to know, but I have this idea Minnesota has a pretty great like arts and performance scene, like in around Minneapolis.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Rochester, which is a few like miles away, about an hour. Like you're from the Midwest when you measure distance by time. It was like it's a couple hours away rather than giving you miles.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it was a couple hours away from Minneapolis, and luckily growing up, there were like three or four community theaters, and so I got into acting when I was about 13 or 14,
Hmm.
and I got to like kind of circle around there, and that grew once I moved to Minneapolis. Like there's the Fringe Festival there, and I actually just took my hour of stand up there last year,
Oh, great.
and it's a really beautiful art scene, and it's a small enough scene that everyone kind of knows each other, which can be both good and bad.
Hmm.
But it certainly builds the sense of community, and it also like because there's the fringe there, there's a lot of wild stuff, like a lot of experimental stuff, and it's not just like the Guthrie Theater. There are a couple of union houses, but there's a lot of really lovely like non-union theater going on there, and the Acme Comedy Club is there, and so like there's good stand up, and you can find a little bit of everything there in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I've never played Acme, but every story I hear about they always put that in as like one of the best clubs in the country between that and Comedy Works in Denver.
Yeah, yeah. One of my friends, it's his favorite comedy venue, and he so much so that he recorded his new album there. And yeah, it's apparently very once you it's difficult to get in, but once you do, it's great.
Yeah, as all great clubs should be. I guess
Yeah.
that's what makes them great is the high barrier of entry. And South Dakota,
Oh
outside
yeah.
of Mount Rushmore, what is going on there?
That's it.
That's it.
Um, Nothing else. Just literally the slogan of the state is great places, great faces, and it's a picture of Mount Rushmore. But no, like there's a lot of wonderful wooded areas. I grew up kind of going to there's a small town, Spearfish, South Dakota, where my folks are from, and that's in the Black Hills area of South
Hmm.
Dakota, which is kind of near Wyoming, which is like has all this beautiful forestry and a couple of national parks and stuff like that. And then there's the plain areas and the Badlands, which are beautiful in their own way, but boy, are they boring to drive through. But it's mostly like a lot of there's casinos and tourist traps, and it's the thing of like places like I think South Dakota and to a certain extent like Wyoming and Montana. It's that those places were all settled by people who did not want to be around other people. So
Right, right.
there's this certain kind of vibe with people that live there, which sometimes can be good and sometimes can be bad. Um, but there's like a lot of people who go out and shoot tin cans for fun still, and like it's still as close to the Wild West as we can get.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I definitely find that those like there's this really interesting show. I don't know if you've ever heard of it called Homestead Rescue that I watch on the Discovery Channel. It's
Oh,
if it follows this guy and his son and daughter, his grown son and daughter, as they go around and try to help people that are living off the grid, but they're not good at it. Like they don't have the skills or the
mhm.
to like grow their own food or hunt or basically set up like greenhouses, all the stuff that you would take care of if you're living off the grid. And they help them like get better at it. It's fascinating to watch, but
That sounds really interesting.
it's really interesting. And he is this very specific, he to me is the exact kind of guy. He's from like middle of nowhere, Alaska. And
Oh, for sure.
my favorite part in at least in the first season is when he's like, my resume, I'll show it to you, and he holds up his hands that are all like cut up and calloused and gross looking. um, those are those same kind of guys that the guys that want to get away from people. I'm glad they're doing it because they don't seem like they could function. Like those kind of things, like
Oh yeah.
the kind of people that where if you accidentally got lost in the woods and ended up on their property, they'd shoot you kind of people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like let them go do your own thing. It's just like if you want to be that far away, that's fine. We'll let you do that. No worries. Yeah. I think about that a lot of like, when you're talking about like mental health issues and stuff like that, of like, you can just like not abide at all by society's rules, but you also have to remove yourself from society if you want that. And if people want to do that and they can function, go ahead.
Yeah,
But
exactly. I feel like there's those folks are like the most like zen, like nature, like that's like the
mm.
perfect blending of like the zen nature type person and like uh and like get off my lawn kind of redneck. Like
Yeah.
there are two paths in the wood, and one of them takes you to like building like putting solar panels and building your own house, and the other takes you to like hosting like a libertarian podcast with three people who
Hmm.
yell at each other and they make six figures a month on Patreon. uh
I'm gonna guide you through a meditation, and then we're gonna clean our rifles, and it'll be a great time.
that podcast, I know I know it exists somewhere. They have the most broad, like the Venn diagram of people who like those is like my favorite things: crystals and shotguns. Love them both.
Yeah.
So
The Zen art of a 22.
exactly, Zen and the art of putting holes in a Mountain Dew can.
Yep.
So
Precisely. There we go.
so if you're a theater kid, you're growing up among people trying to get away from others. This doesn't sound like the kind of place that one wants to stay in. If you're you.
Oh, I mean, well, yeah, I mean, yes and no, because they had such a vibrant art scene in in Minneapolis that originally I was going to go there, and then I didn't get accepted to the like I was an idiot, and I only applied for the one college, so I was like, oh, I'll be fine, and then I didn't get accepted, and then I had a panic attack, cut off all my hair because I had like shoulder length, and then started applying to anywhere that had me, and one of the places was in New York. And I ended up going to the New York Conservatory for Dramatic Arts, which sounds very prestigious, and it isn't. But it was a good training, and it's one of those things of like with any kind of arts education, you get what you put into it. There are a lot of people who were going there just kind of burned through their parents' money, and I was very studious and I took it very seriously, and I think I was pretty annoying. But once I did get out of that like kind of small town vibe, because I've always had this like manic energy about me, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was literally doing like I would do like 8 plays a year, and doing sketch comedy on the side and like trying to get rid of all this energy. And then once I moved to New York, the energy like New York requires that level of energy of you, and so I kind of felt at home that way.
Oh, 100%. And were your parents supportive of the artistic endeavors?
Yeah, they were, surprisingly. Kind of wish at this point that they hadn't have been because, well, I mean, I guess everybody's laid off now, so,
You are not the
um,
first guest that I've talked to in the past couple of weeks to say, "Oh, why didn't they make me do something else?"
yeah, well, like I think about it, I'm like, man, I could have been a doctor and I could have been secure. My gosh. Um,
Yeah, you
and then
people would
like
clap for
one of
you.
my good friends, she used to be a lawyer, and then she got, tenure, and then she was like, I'll quit to do comedy, and she had security, and then she saved, and then she went and she did this new thing, and she's successful at it. And I'm like, well, that, you know, wish I would have been able to do that. But yeah, they were very supportive. I remember it was like the week before I was moving to New York, and like I don't know why they let me move to New York when I was 18. Like there's so many reasons. They must have trusted me
Uh huh.
so much, and I have no idea why. But I remember I turned to my mother and I was like, "Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think I can actually be an actor for a living?" And my mom said, "Well, I talked to your dad about it, and your dad's really practical, and he thinks you can do it. And so if he thinks you can do it, but I think you can do it." And it was a really lovely moment that, like, knowing that both of them were on my side about this. And it was really lovely. And like all throughout growing up, the arts were really encouraged in my household because I was homeschooled as well.
Uh-huh.
My mother has a teaching degree, and so it wasn't one of those situations. So
Gotcha.
but the arts and their like the humanities were really emphasized growing up, as opposed to like necessarily like math and science, because she was an English major, so she could emphasize those a little easier.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
so she was always very supportive, and I always kind of figured that both my parents would have, like specifically my mom, would have liked to go into the arts if she had had the opportunity. Like she's a writer, she's done some writing, but like I think she like if she'd been able to, I think she would have liked to do it.
Yeah, so she kind of wants you to do uh the thing that she couldn't do, just to say that you could do it almost. That makes
You
sense to me.
still
Yeah, yeah, I thought I lost you for a
you
second there.
okay. Yeah. But yeah, and well, my two siblings are also very creative in their own right. My
Mhm.
sister's a very good painter, and my other sibling's a gifted writer and playwright, and we're all sort of artistic, and so it was really encouraged. And so I don't think either of my parents were particularly surprised
Gotcha.
when
Oh, so
I ran off.
no, totally. They've raised an entire generation of artists. This all pans out. I'm seeing how this goes down. So you got to New York when you were 18,
Yeah.
from like small town, Midwest, to study theater, and so when you first get to the city, are you completely overwhelmed?
Oh, absolutely. I remember I got lost trying to get back to my dormitory, and I almost had what I would now call a panic attack.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was like, "It's okay. There's always going to be another train coming down the line.
Right.
It'll be fine." And then it was, but it was pretty overwhelming. I was actually pretty held up in my own room a lot during my first year here in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Was pretty antisocial. And I think that came from being overwhelmed, but I didn't realize it. Also, like being homeschooled, I was never particularly good at making friends. So I didn't really know how to interact with my students and my fellow students rather. And like I would be uncomfortable going, hey, do you want to just hang out? So I was really sort of, sequestered off, except for a couple of people that I hung out regularly with. But yeah, it felt overwhelming. But luckily, since I was really only going to the one place, which was the school and the dorms, like just between those two, it worked out okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can. I wasn't homeschooled, and I still have hard times just like introducing myself at clubs, just like, hey, I'm Will, I do comedy, nice to meet you, I enjoyed
Mhm.
your set. I have the hardest time doing that. I'm better at like, I've gotten pretty good about not about realizing like the worst thing that could happen, like if say I want to reach out to like a specific guest or something, the worst that's going to happen is they'll either ignore the email or they'll politely decline. Very rarely is someone going to say no and you're a terrible person who should die. I guess that's always the fear in the back of
Oh
my
yeah,
head.
for sure.
And then what was your acting training like? Because I went to Towson University for theater also, so I feel like we kind of have some similar backgrounds. Um, the program I went through was mostly was grounded in method and your Udhagen, Stanislavski, sense memory, all that stuff, which is very valuable. And I think as you get older, it becomes more effective because you've lived a little while. I'm curious what your training was like.
Oh, sure. I mean, we had 2 years, and the first year was just like all basic acting training, and it was a Meisner-based school, which was the opposite of the kind of acting I had been doing up until that point. I was like one of those actors that would build a character around me, and I was doing accents and like I would, do a bunch of movement stuff and that sort of thing. And the Meisner training is the opposite of just like relax, be yourself, respond. And
Mm-hmm.
that was really difficult for me to do, but it made me a better actor. And then we had, voice and speech and movement stuff. And then we did a Uta Hagen based class, and I really got along with that person, that teacher, but she didn't think I was a good actor. So it was one of those like, you know, I like this class, but she's like whatever about me. But there were a couple of people that really liked what I was doing, and I felt gratified by that. And we also, the second year was all based off of film and television. So that first year was kind of like breaking you down and getting everybody up to speed regarding what technique they were going to use. And then the second year was all about like, how do you interact with the industry? How do you interact with like film, and like what is your type and that sort of thing. And that was really helpful. And we even had like an acting business class, which was perhaps the most helpful class out of everything.
Oh,
And
what did you learn
also
in that?
the concept of a brand, that was like the first time I'd ever heard that word. The concept of type, how to interact with agents, you know, writing cover letters, sending thank you notes, that sort of thing. And like understanding how unions work, and like at what point you should try to join the union, and like all these sorts of things. My guy was hawking his book, but what happened was a few people split it, and then they passed it around like
Mm-hmm.
essentially illegally, and like we're not all buying your book, man.
Totally.
We're acting students, we don't have the money for that. But it was really helpful, pardon me,
Oh, no, no problem.
regarding like figuring out how the business aspect worked, and how casting directors work. And like you had to intern with a casting director, and so you saw how actual auditions went and that sort of thing, which is really helpful. Of like, oh, okay, they're focused on like getting their day of work done, not the artistic merit of like what is happening, you know. And the more you can look at it of like, okay, I'm helping this person out by like being a solution to the problem, that really was emphasized and was incredibly helpful, because then your nerves kind of go away about it, you know.
Oh, totally.
um
Man, I wish we
but
never
the
learned any of this
Go ahead.
stuff.
Yeah, it was really incredibly helpful. And like I've worked with a number of actors that like have no idea how any of that works. And it was like it's a really a big shame, because like specifically like BFAs don't offer anything like that, specifically BAs in theater or BFAs in theater, because like it's not really seen as important because it's not artistic. But it's like that prepared me more than anything else. Like we did a web series class as well, and so we had to make our own web series because people knew that the industry was already going that way. And the people was like, an older teacher was like, you have to get a good headshot, you're going to spend a couple of $1,000 on a headshot. And then the web series person was like, headshots don't matter, you need a reel. If you don't have a reel, we will not look at your profile. That is how it is. There's no reason. Like, your face is fine, but I want to see how you move and how you look on camera more than that.
Uh-huh.
And so like getting even that little edge on people was great. And like the second year, I would say, was particularly helpful and really set me up for success, more or
Right.
less. That being said, I'm doing mostly stand-up comedy now, so no. But yeah, it
Right.
was it was really a good time, and I remember it fondly. Although like there was a lot of like made up drama at the time, as every, I think, young person has.
Sure. What is something about the industry that you learned in during that time that's really valuable? Because if I was going to take a stab at what my type is, and I wouldn't even know the word for it, but I would probably put myself in the category of like the goofy best friend, or the like, I'm not the lead in romantic comedies. I'm the guy that dispenses all of the advice to the
Yeah, you're the
lead.
Philip Seymour Hoffman in Along Came Polly.
Yeah, exactly. That's who I imagine I would be, because when like and I don't know how old you are. I'm 33. When you're like when you're like in your 20s, those kind of like best friend, or at least when I was in my 20s, like the idea was like the best friend in like the teen comedy or the ensemble comedy was basically what you would get looked at for.
Um, sure. I mean, one of the most valuable things that I did learn via like industry stuff was if you can describe yourself, unfortunately, if you can describe yourself as another kind of actor's type rather than like an archetypal character,
Mm-hmm.
that really helps. And because that way they can go, okay, that's the kind of things we can throw them up for, rather than like, well, you're you. And like, I know that really bothers a lot of artists to go, well, I'm this kind of person, because you don't want to compare yourself to anybody because you are your own person. But like,
Right.
it's how, unfortunately, how the industry works.
Mm-hmm.
And like, another thing that I learned a little later, and it wasn't, and this is why I don't feel as bad as I do, of like, this wasn't like learned from school. There's two things I want to get to. Is like, um I was listening to Ethan Hawke talk about acting, and it's like the British people have the idea of a acting career correct, in as much as like Lear is the goal. Like, you should want to be acting into your 80s,
Mm-hmm.
whereas like Americans are all like, let's get a success right away, let's go, let's go, let's go. And then the other thing is like, I've realized that like when you're in your 20s, unless you look like a teenager, you're probably not going to get cast in much unless the thing is about being a 20-year-old. And so that's one of the reasons I started doing stand up, is like, I know I have these years where I'm going to be like auditioning and cutting my teeth, doing that sort of thing. But like,
Right.
I need to keep myself occupied well, I turn until I turn 30 and can like be in movies about adults,
Sure.
you know?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. All of those kind of ensemble Netflix things that are like Friends in College, all of that stuff about. I think so much. I've been watching A Million Little Things. I don't know if you've heard of that show on CBS. It's kind of like their answer to This Is Us.
Mm.
It's it's
What was it called?
it's called A Million Little Things. It's kind of sad, kind of funny. It's an ensemble drama.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and
Sure. I
like
haven't.
like
I'm not familiar with that, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
yeah, but like it's all good. But it's I think of like shows like that where it's like, like professionals in their 30s and like, oh, they're and the thing with the middle little things is one of their friends commits suicide and they have to and they're all dealing with the fallout from that, and then everyone starts making out with each other and everybody gets pregnant and then everyone finds out and everyone
You
gets
still
mad
there?
at everybody else. Yeah, I'm still here. Did I cut out for a second there? I am still here if you can hear me. It might take a second, so I'm going to keep vamping. Um, a million little things available wherever you stream. Find quality programs. I might have to. Let me see here. I am still. Can you still hear me, Tristan? Might have dropped out for a second. And we'll just edit. I'll edit this later. Um,
I can. You're still cutting in and out. I'm sorry.
oh, it's okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Also, you're recording this entire call.
Yes, I'm getting my side.
Okay.
I'm getting my side in one track in GarageBand and your side in another track. So when I cut out there for a second, I was just talking about A Million Little Things on CBS, so that I don't have to do as much editing
Yeah.
later. Um, so
Okay. I'm sorry. Can I just clarify? Should I be recording on my end?
no, you're doing fine.
Okay. Cool. 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 Sorry, I just wasn't sure because I was like, because I haven't been. Sorry
Oh,
about that.
oh no problem at all. We're going great so far. So and when did you start doing comedy? So you start doing comedy because you realized that you were going to have to wait to be able to get cast in certain things.
Well, that was part of the reason, and then another reason was like, I'd always wanted to try it. I was always a big fan of stand up. I remember when I was in high school, being homeschooled, I had all this extra time during the afternoon, and that's when they would play these comedy specials, stand up specials, and I
Mm-hmm.
would just like watch anybody that came on, and I remember absorbing so much of that, and also I had done a little stand up in Minnesota when I had moved back there, and then when I moved back to New York, I started it in earnest because I also got a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and I needed an outlet to talk about that. And then I
Mm-hmm.
also have always had all of this energy, and I needed somewhere to put it when I wasn't making, art or acting or anything like that.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And how long have you been doing stand up now?
Um, uh, let's see, 4 years, I think.
Oh, so
Three,
so
four or
still
five.
relatively new to it. Right on.
Yeah, I mean, like I think that's a long time, but then people who have been doing it for a while are like, "Oh no, no, you're still new. You're still figuring it out." And I'm like, "Well, thank God. Thank you for giving me that,
Yeah.
gift
Oh,
of relief of
absolutely.
anxiety there."
Oh,
Yeah.
dude, I've been doing stand up for 13 years, and I'm still learning new things and evolving. So it's a continuous process. Again, the idea is that you want to be doing this
Oh,
into your 80s. You don't want to
yeah,
you don't want to plateau and then become cranky and then a cranky hack.
absolutely. Yeah, you wanna keep going through. Yeah,
Yeah,
changing
100%.
and evolving with the times and with yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I think the best stand-ups do, because I feel like and then there are other stand-ups that they do it for a while and then they're great, and then they become directors or playwrights or producers. They start it kind of evolves out. I would be very curious.
Mhm.
I'm going to be very curious to see if Eddie Murphy returns to stand-up comedy and tours again, or does another special. I'd be
Mm.
very curious to see what he's like now, because my last image of him as a stand-up is when he's like in his early 20s. Like, that's when
Oh yeah.
Delirious and Raw were made.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very curious. Like, and he was saying that since he was doing that Netflix special, he had like he started going to clubs and started working out material, and like it sometimes was just like not doing well. There's that whole thing of like you have like 30 seconds for, and then they get over the fact that you're a famous person, and then you got to make them laugh quick because otherwise they're gonna not be on your side. I'm
Yeah,
really curious to see what happens there with him as well
yeah.
because he's like his career has changed so much.
Oh, absolutely. And just even like when he was younger and he was like super filthy. And I don't know if you've ever seen. I don't know if you've ever seen Raw, but he has that whole extended story about like when Bill Cosby called him up and chastised him for cursing, and then to see him on SNL go, "Who's America's dad now, Bill?" I'd be.
Yeah.
I I think it'll be very interesting to see like older Eddie Murphy, who has kids and is like and has been in family movies. Be very curious to see
Hmm.
what he is, what topics is he joking about, because I feel like, and I'm speaking for myself, but I notice it in other stand-ups as well. Like when you're in your uh, when you're younger and less things, I feel like less things are sacred. Like you can. I was more
Uh-huh.
inclined to make jokes about anything, despite the fact that it might be kind of fucked up to make jokes about certain things.
Sure.
And now in my 30s, it's not that I don't find off color jokes. I find them offensive or whatever. I'm zooming in on of what's funny to me, and
Hmm.
and I'm kind of by nature of that narrowing what I talk about, but I'm still interested in what I'm doing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And like a lot of like it gets played out because the shock value as a young person of like being filthy is like it's you get away with it. It feels like exhilarating, and then by the time you're an actual adult and you realize like, oh no, everyone has said all this stuff, it's no longer, you know, special in any way. You can kind of move past that. But yeah, absolutely. And like I think I think also with even like in the last like 4 or 5 years that I've been doing stand up, like I've already decided not to joke about certain things because either like I think it's kind of overplayed, or also like I don't want to fuss made about a joke I made. Like a lot of it comes down to like I don't want to be exhausted by people coming to me and going, you shouldn't have said that. You know what I mean? Like
Uh,
I don't find any joy in that.
I know exactly what you mean.
So I tend to do jokes.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. My greatest goal in life is to not be bothered, and there's a certain style of comedy that I think lends itself to being bothered constantly. I don't have the energy for it.
Uh,
Nor do I think I have. Nor do I now feel that that's my skill set. I'll leave that to the comics that is their skill set,
mhm.
because I do
Yeah,
believe it's important for that to exist as well. I'm just not interested in being the guy to do it. Um, so
for sure. Yeah,
and
I know where my comedy lies, and it's silly. That's how I've come to realize it.
absolutely. And
Like,
what's the focus of your hour about?
oh, that's all about bipolar disorder and my experience with it, and like it's a good hour of it, and then I do some like characters too, and I talk a little bit about like some background with me, obviously, because that way you can like empathize with me as a person.
Mm-hmm.
But it's mostly about bipolar disorder, and it's called Manic Impressive. And I was gonna take it to Edinburgh this year, but nope. For two
Yeah.
reasons. One, I didn't have the money, it turned out, and number two, it's not even happening anymore. So there you go.
Yeah.
But I was lucky enough to take it to the Minnesota Fringe last year, and it went really well, and I was really happy with it, and it was very moving, the response to it as well, because you're dealing with subject matter that is deeply personal, and sometimes people come up to you and are like, either I have this thing or I know someone who lives with this condition, and this was very cathartic for me, and I'm always gratified by that because two birds, one stone. Why not be funny and also kind of educate and enlighten people too?
Exactly. That's kind of like when the kind of release that I get when I like listen when I go and see like a favorite band. Like when I love having like feeling something and laughing at a comedian, and especially like if you're
Yeah,
doing like a
yeah,
themed kind of
absolutely.
show. That's why it's one of the most rewarding things as a performer I think you can do. So bipolar. I'm curious what like the experience of that is, because I probably don't understand it. I guess I'm associating it with some version of like manic depression, or or like some kind of like split personality thing, and I don't think that's it.
Well, you're about half right because it used to be called manic depression and now it's called bipolar disorder. But there was like apparently such a stigma surrounding manic depression as a concept that they changed the name of it. It's the same disease in like the 80s, which
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't aware of. But like for everyone who has it, it's like manic depressive sounds is more succinct and makes more sense. Carrie Fisher once said bipolar disorder sounds like an overweight polar bear or something, like no, a
Right. Right.
promiscuous polar bear. Um, but yeah, essentially, it's characterized by two major moods, the mania and the depression. There are three levels of bipolar disorder. There's cyclothymia, where like you have little ups and little downs, kind of like seasonal affective disorder,
Mm-hmm.
only it goes in a cycle and it doesn't necessarily have to do with the seasons. So you can be really depressed in the middle of July, which is always fun. Then you have what I have, which is bipolar 2, which is the next level in severity of the condition, where you have major depressions, which can last for like a month or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have what are known as hypomanias, not hypermanias, meaning hypo meaning less than, like hypoglycemic, not hyper meaning more, because if you became hypermanic, I think you would just dissolve into the universe.
Right.
Um, where you're speaking very quickly, you have a lot of creative ideas, you don't sleep as much, you're extremely agitated, which is very difficult to deal with, and you can like have mood shifts within that. You can go from like, I love everybody to leave me alone really quick, and it's very difficult to navigate behavior sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because of that. And then there's bipolar 1, which is you have the major depressive episodes, and then you also have full-blown manias where you can experience psychosis and like fully detach from reality and have a psychotic break. And that's generally when people get institutionalized. And it's not actually for when they're depressed, because for bipolar 1, at least, the depression is so severe, generally, you can't do anything, including kill yourself. Whereas with bipolar 2, you're more likely, unfortunately, to try to commit suicide because you have a little bit more energy
Mm-hmm.
to try and get stuff done.
Well,
Which
that's
is,
an
funnily enough,
unfortunate.
one of the reasons antidepressants have that as a side effect, is that you may try to attempt suicide because you finally have the energy to get to all those things you've been putting off. You know,
Right, like that episode of Friends where Jason Alexander's looks at his board and it just says "kill self" on it, and he's like, "All right, I'm gonna get to." Man,
yeah, yeah.
well, and how have you been faring as far as managing that?
A lot better lately. It was a real issue in my early 20s, which is generally when the condition presents itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been sober for 3, 4 years now, and that's been a huge help.
Oh, congrats.
Um, yeah, it's one of those things of like, thank you. I've never done stand up as not a sober person.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always had that experience, and people are like, "Why? Wow, okay, that's fascinating." But yeah, and that's really helped even out my moods, and has been. I'm less triggered to go into one episode or the other. I'm doing therapy. I'm on medication. I'm doing everything I can to remain healthy, and it's just one of those things of like, the more seriously you take it, the easier your life is. And that's something I realized. Like, once again, it's one of those things that I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to have to think
Yeah.
about, like, am I going to go insane, essentially? If I can avoid that, that's more is the better. And actually, in fact, the more creative you can be. If you're getting out of your own way, the more creative you can be, I find. Because all those neuroses are the things that stop the flow of ideas, and that whatever it is that connects you to the creativity, whether you think it's the universe, God, yourself, whatever, your ego is the thing that cuts that line. And the more you can shove that to the side, the easier it is.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm glad that we're starting to move away from the like tortured artist, tortured clown tropes of performers, because uh, it's kind of a destructive mode to perpetuate. The same way I would put
Oh
the
yeah.
same way about the grind of stand up. Sometimes I think it's a little over romanticized, but I'm glad that you're
Oh
managing
yeah.
that, man, and you're still faring and you're still doing okay amidst the quarantine.
I'm going a little stir crazy. It's like full blown Gene Wilder, Richard Pryor sometimes, but yeah, I've been managing pretty well. I've actually been pretty impressed with how I've been holding up. But it's, you know, you gotta once again focus on what you can control. And this is beyond my control, but what I can control is my attitude towards it, what I do daily to try to, you know, uh, alleviate whatever anxieties I have. I'm really lucky that I live with my girlfriend, so I have company. Like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
alone. That's been really I've been really lucky that way, mental health wise. But I am more concerned of like if I get depressed, I feel like I'll be fine. I'm worried that I'm gonna have a manic episode and like paint all the walls or something. That's more what I'm worried about.
Sure,
Because
sure.
like, I already talk a lot. I can't imagine like if I go into an episode and like I won't shut up. It'll drive my roommate and my girlfriend crazy, and like I'll just have to sleep on the roof or something.
Right. Well, if we've got to do a few more episodes to preserve your domestic life, we can work that out. Or I don't know if you need guests for your show, but we I as performers, we try to support each other and lift each other up. If I can jump on some conversational grenades, I'm all about that because my girlfriend, well, she's not my girlfriend, she's my fiance.
Oh,
Real
congratulations.
similar vibe. Like she's born and raised in Brooklyn, so like staying still is not in
Mm.
her in her mode of operation. So we
Mhm.
both try to give each other what we can, and then also be there for each other in the best way possible. How long have you been doing the anime podcast?
Oh, sure. That's one of three I do. But the anime one, we've been doing it for 2 years. My girlfriend and I, we were on a hiatus for a couple of months because she got a full-time job and I got a full-time job, and
Mm-hmm.
it just became less of a priority. We recently did an episode though, and we're going to be doing more here and there because everyone has time on their hands now.
Of course.
Um, but it's been really wonderful because I don't know anything about anime. I watched like a couple of shows here and there off and on as a young person, but she was really into it. And so she picks a show and she does research and she guides me through it. And it's been really fun. And it also is a wonderful excuse to sit down and watch something with someone you love. So
Oh
it's
yeah,
been wonderful.
yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what I like about podcasts. Like I've had my friend Paul Cohen on, who's a member of the sketch group that I work with at the Pitt People's Improv Theater.
Mm-hmm.
We've done several episodes because he's one of five people I know that loves the same kind of early 2000s pop punk that I do. So we just will go on for hours. Um, what kind of shows have you watched on your anime podcast? What is your girlfriend have you watched for the show?
Okay. Well, we started with Cowboy Bebop, which I think was a great introduction because I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and so there was like enough overlap thematically there.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a pretty Western, both in like terms of the genre, but also Western anime. Like, there's a lot of familiar concepts for people who live in the West to latch onto.
Mm-hmm.
Then we did Fooly Cooly, which was really fun because that thing is absolutely nuts and is like indecipherable in the best way possible. We did this really wonderful show called Kids on the Slope, which is about musicians in post World War II Japan. And that was by far my favorite. It was really sweet and sentimental and like just really, really like a slice of life anime. It was like really lovely. And then we made our way all the way through Evangelion. We did three out of the four movies, and we have to just like push to do the fourth movie and just get it done with. And that was such a slog, not because the show is bad or anything, but because there's
Mm-hmm.
so much research that she had to do about it, because there's so many theories. It's so layered with themes and like psychoanalysis stuff and like all of this like academic research she did, that it kind of exhausted her. And so when we got to the end of it, she was like, I need a break.
No,
And
totally.
so we did the third movie a couple weeks ago, and then we'll eventually get to the fourth.
Interesting. I've Kids on the Slope is on my list in Crunchyroll. As soon as I finish, I've been watching um, Inspector, which is something I think Crunchyroll specifically is producing. That's like a mystery, like who done it, and there's like ghosts and
Hmm.
cops get involved. That one's been pretty interesting. My favorite show, and I don't talk about it very often with people because it's one of those shows that people either love or they hate, and there is some stuff in it that
Hmm.
I personally get uncomfortable with, but it's just kind of the nature of the medium. Is I love Sword Art Online. It's my
Uh-huh.
one of my personal favorites because I like the characters. I like the whole trapped in a video game concept. That's interesting to me. Um, some other another one I would want to suggest to you. Have you heard of a director called Makoto Shinkai?
I have not. No. Who is
S-
this?
So he is my favorite anime director when it comes to feature films. You can't see the studio in my desk, my little setup here in my apartment, but I have a framed poster of
Mm,
my favorite movie of his, which is called Your Name. It came out in 2016, and I think it's the
that sounds
best.
familiar.
Yeah, I personally think it's the best animation ever made, but that's just me. um,
Mm,
so
okay.
I would really, I think you would really dig that. It's the premise is kind of familiar, but there's a lot of like supernatural elements, and the music is amazingly well done. So I really enjoyed that one.
Mm, yeah. I'll have to look into it. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, that one is pretty great. And then what else have I been into late? I also
I haven't caught up on it. Go ahead.
oh no, you go ahead. I'm scrolling through for what I wanted to bring up
Okay.
next.
I haven't I'm not on the latest season, but Boku no Hero Academia is a choice choice show. I do tear up often. It's very sweet, very sincere. I love teamwork that moves me emotionally. Big
Hmm.
fan. And then obviously, I grew up watching like the Ghibli films and stuff like that, and like Castle in the Sky is like for me gold standard. And when IFC does their Ghibli Fest every year, I try and see at least one of them.
Oh yeah, I've gone and seen My Neighbor Totoro during that a couple of times. Yeah, Studio Ghibli is just they're the gold standard. A couple of years ago, I actually went to I was in Taiwan, and
Hmm.
I didn't get to the exact town, but the town in Spirited Away is based off of this old
Yeah.
mining village in outside of Taipei. It's
Oh.
like built into the mountains, but I did go into like a mountain town in Taiwan. It's quite a magical feeling, like
Mm.
like these old like 16th 17th century style like houses built into the sides of mountains. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that sounds really beautiful.
It absolutely is. And what are the other two podcasts you do?
Oh, sure. One is about the let me take that again. One is an interview podcast about the intersectionality between mental health and the arts. So I have a guest on, I interview them about what they do creatively, and then how mental health has affected their creativity. I feel very lucky. I've gotten to speak with some heroes of mine. Ahmed Best, who you will probably best know as Jar Jar Binks. I got to speak with him, and he's one of the two reasons I started acting, and so that was like a huge deal to me. I My mind was blown. I kind of had an existential crisis afterwards, and I was luckily, yeah, I was just like, well, now where do I go?
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah, and then I was lucky enough to talk to Gary Goldman as well, and that was really wonderful. I wasn't too familiar with who he was at the time, but he's such a beautiful guy. Like it was such a joy to speak with him. Like I feel very privileged and lucky to have spoken to some of the guests that I've spoken to. And then I, of course, like if I meet someone who's interesting, I'm gonna talk to them. I think they would be a good fit. It's open to whomever I bump into.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Yeah, Gary Goldman is he's so great. I'm hoping I can get him on the show eventually. But when I was a doorman at the Laughing Devil, I would see him. I saw him a couple of times, and he was always super nice, always
Oh,
super
really?
funny. Yeah, I remember. This is like, and this was years before. Like, I feel like he's kind of he's had like a major breakthrough with the Great Depression, but this was before.
Mm.
He was, I think, working on his most recent album at the time, but
Hmm.
he had just such great jokes about uh, like the bass boost on a CD player, or like
Oh yeah.
the library. Like it was that set, and I remember like
He
getting to watch it like in the back of the room and just laughing so hard. just having such a great time
He
because
is he's the master at the mundane. My gosh, like he talks about pennies and cookies in a way that is like even Mark Twain would be like, "Well, I have to give it to you." You know.
I agree completely. I remember I was watching Mike Birbiglia and Chris Gethard on Instagram Live, and they were talking about the way, like, Chis Goldman's choice of words. Like, he wouldn't say.
Oh yeah.
Most people would say, "I put a little bit of sugar in my tea." He would say, "A smidge of sugar in my tea," and it's just like an inherently funnier way to say
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, yeah. He's got such a mastery of language, and you can tell that he's like incredibly literate as well. Like it's his stuff is, I don't know, it's the best. And like I'm really proud and happy. Like it's weird to be proud of a guy that I barely know, but I know enough. Like I'm really proud of him for breaking through and managing his illness, but also like
Mm-hmm.
having a breakthrough career wise, because I know like he was out in LA and getting meetings, and like I hope that we see a lot more of Gary, because he's, you know, he's such a kind man too. He's such a mensch, you know,
Yeah, absolutely.
as they say.
It's always good to see good people who deserve it get things. I hope to see more of
Yeah.
that for him as well. And last thing I wanna ask you, because this has been a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed chatting with you.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
uh, this
You
is some
too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And if you ever need guests for any of your stuff, if you are trying to fill hours in the day, let me know, because I've got nothing but time, as we all do. Something I want to ask you, and I like to ask. I guess I like to ask my peers this: what is something? What's the idea you have that you haven't created yet, but you want to create?
Oh, sure. I'm sitting on three scripts for short films right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I was going to start filming them, but then of course this happened.
Right.
So that's the main idea. And then I obviously like the tour that I was doing. That's another big one.
Mm-hmm.
But specifically these shorts were things that I realized that not only do I love acting, but I love being on film sets. I love every part of filmmaking, and the more I can be involved with that, the more I think satisfied I'm gonna be. Because I love podcasting and I love stand up. Like my first love is acting and film, and but you get, you know, different things out of different parts. And I only until recently did I realize how much energy I was getting out and how much catharsis I was getting out of stand up. But yeah, one of them is a parody of a Werner Herzog documentary only about podcasting, and that one is the first one that I want to film, and I really want to move on that because I think it's a good idea and accomplished fairly well.
Excellent. Well, I sincerely hope that I know that you'll get to make that, because um, you strike me as the kind of guy that uh, that gets things done, and perseveres, because to manage the your own mind the way you've had to manage your own mind, as well as a drastic change in living environment, and then to get through that. Because I remember my first year in New York, and not uh, taking some time to feel like I didn't to taking some time to not feel like I was at a party that I wasn't not sure I was invited to. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know, there's I feel like there is on the other side of this thing that we're all having to deal with right now. There's uh, a fountain of accomplishment that we'll all be at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think once this starts returning normal, we'll see a lot more very creative people coming out, because I think we're all going to be just so grateful. You know, I think people hopefully will be less rude and cruel and stuff, because we're all going to be grateful for time. I saw someone on Twitter, I can't remember who, was like, man, we're going to be grateful for 5 member audiences after this whole thing is over with, you know. And I think the creativity productivity will boost once, we get back to leaving our houses.
100%. I know my wedding had to get moved back a year, and I know it's going to be twice as
Oh boy.
great.
Yeah.
Uh, as it's going to be twice as great when it does happen. My band. We were going to play our first 3 shows in March, and they all got postponed. And I know they're going to be. I'm going to feel infinitely more amazing on stage playing those shows when they happen. So, I want that for myself, and I want that for all of us, and I think you're going to get it. So I really appreciate you chatting with me, Tristan. Thank you for reaching out. This was really great.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. I agree. It was really a lot of fun and great talking to you, boss.
Absolutely. And where can people find your stuff online?
I have a website, tristanjmiller.com. You can go there, look at all the podcasts, but also I'm on Twitter at tristanjmiller1, and that's my primary social media that I use. I also do morning affirmations in the weekdays. So if you need a boost during this time, I'm trying to give you a boost, trying to give me a boost too.
Excellent. And I'll turn my camera on real quick so I can give you a proper farewell. You can kind of see my setup I have here. I love the red and black soundproofing. That's great.
Yeah, thanks. Amazon.com, baby. But they won't order anymore now because those people got to go home.
Exactly. Thanks for talking to me, Tristan. I appreciate your time.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Have a good day. Stay safe.
You as well. Stay safe as well. All right, everybody, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Tristan, for your time. I sincerely appreciated talking to you, man. And you can check out links to Tristan's stuff in the description. I'll have that listed down there. And if you enjoyed this and know someone else who you think might want to listen to this show as well, we are available everywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. And I also want to give a shout out to my supporter on Patreon at the awesome producer level, Mary Beth Mooney. Thank you so much for your support. I sincerely appreciate it. And if you guys want, you can go to patreon.com/awesomedisaster. Check out some of the exclusive stuff I'm making over there for subscribers. And even if you don't subscribe, I'm just happy that you're here and listening, because that's why I do this. So I appreciate you guys being here. You can also, of course, follow me on Twitter at ComicWillCarey, and you can follow the podcast at AwesomeDpod as well. And you can check out my band Bright Ugly on Bandcamp as well, brightugly.bandcamp.com. And I hope you guys continue to stay safe, continue to stay healthy, and do what you can to get through. I'm not sure when the light at the end of the tunnel is going to appear, but we'll get there together. And so thanks for being here, and I will see you guys next time between Awesome and Disaster. Stay safe, everybody.